I'm Dick Jones, as vice chair, but soon Judy became a selectman, so she was ineligible to be chair along. Yeah, whatever.
Spit it out, Dick.
Yeah.
I'm Judy Brotman. I'm the select board representative to the budget committee.
Dean Academy Administrative Assistant.
Trade. Chris Ramsden.
School board rep.
Eric Colbert.
Michael Matusik.
Scott May.
Let's go around the back there. You people don't get to hide either.
Sue McKenzie?
Brett Ryan.
Jeff House.
All right. Next thing on the agenda was the May 8th minutes. Even though we had a separate, quote, non-public session, the way the minutes were composed, it all fit as a part of the regular session minutes, so there's not separate minutes for the non-public session. I hear a motion to,
And that's, that, according to the municipal rule, that's okay, because we've always had separate.
that's what I thought, and Dina
And
convinced me we didn't need
No,
separate.
if you, I'm just
You only
checking.
need separate minutes if you're going to make a record of what was said. And keep, you know, it was a non-public, but there's no reason to write.
We always had to reference an RSA, you know, even though we didn't say specifics.
I did reference an RSA. I'll leave that go. That's
C.
okay.
No,
No,
it wasn't in a,
We did reference C,
C.
reputation,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
And I will add that in
Okay.
because it was there, I don't know where it got lost.
All right. I'll move them with that.
so it'll be paragraph 4, we're adding under RSA whatever.
I'll put it in under, yeah, it's
Right
under,
after.
it's under the motion.
Yeah, right after session.
Yep, right there. 91A3:2c,
Whatever.
Yes.
something like that.
Any other changes to the May 5th minutes? All right. Accept the minutes then as corrected,
So we vote.
or do we vote?
Yes.
Yeah, all right, vote.
Those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I abstain, I wasn't here.
All right. Next order of business was electing a chair, possible vice chair, so open the floor to nominations.
I would like to nominate Dick Jones. The reason being, he's been on the board on the budget committee for a long time. He seems very knowledgeable about it. I assume he would be willing to serve. And he has a lot of experience in the town and knows what to do with it.
I'll second that.
Would I hear any other nominations?
I'll nominate Elizabeth Lenshaw, who has served on the board for some number of years as the school board representative. She also served as chair of the school board for some number of years. I think that, in my estimation, she's demonstrated a familiarity with the rules, regulations, and procedures.
I'll second.
Any other? All right, those in favor of myself as chair?
Do we have a discussion?
What? Let's not do that. Listen, any further discussion? I would
Can I
like
ask a
to.
question? Does whoever comes in first gets to be the chair, who comes in second is vice chair? Is that how this works? Or do we have to vote
We
for
never did it that way before.
You vote for both.
You vote for Bill.
Yes, separate nomination.
I think that Ms. Glenchow would be excellent, however, I feel in terms of proper governance, because you were previously the chair of the school board, weren't you, just last year? And school that, and we have tremendous presentations by the school and Jeff and everybody, the site staff, some separation. I know both these people will do a wonderful job. That's my only feeling about it, for having served on the board.
Any further
Does
discussion?
anybody else want to do, anybody else want to do
No,
consider?
Nominate
I
someone.
can't, well, I don't
Me.
know, anybody would, not me.
All right, call for a vote then. Votes for myself. I get 7, all right. And Elizabeth, I guess you get 2, right?
We don't even
No,
get to
I
vote for
just
yourself.
felt like it
We're
seemed
just
silly
gonna
to
say the
create
majority was said.
stress.
Yeah, let's just say
I'm not
majority.
doing numbers,
Right, good, that's a good idea.
thank you.
I will nominate Elizabeth for vice chair.
Excellent. Should we vote on that? Oh, I second.
No, we
That's
already had the
that's the
second.
third second. And we have 3
Any
seconds.
discussion? For further nominations.
Any other nominations? I guess you get it unanimously if there's no other nominations.
Can I propose a short congratulatory motion? No, seriously, in the minutes, saying that we would like to thank people who are willing to serve the
Yes.
community by, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's a
I think it's wonderful that two people are willing to do it.
thank you both.
All right, the next thing we had up was the draft meeting schedule. And as usual, when we get to the school budget in the end of November, basically after Thanksgiving, I think is when we start. We don't have the firm date scheduled yet because we're dependent on the way the school processes things. They're not ready at this time to say what would be presented what date. In past years, we've had that hasn't been an issue. And then the issue comes up toward the end when we're driven by the town meeting, school district meeting clock for the public hearings, that those meetings aren't flexible time-wise. Just so people understand why there's that, just reserve these dates for the school in the draft schedule.
A lot of it depends upon when we can get information from, like, our insurance company and from the state. And so when we get that, that's what holds us up the most. And then tuitions from other towns, things like that.
And the other thing I tried to do was, this is pretty much what we did last year. Just like for tonight, my idea was if we had it on the schedule, we wouldn't necessarily have to promulgate new meeting agendas every time. We're warned in advance based on the schedule. Does anybody have any comments or revisions they'd like to see? Is that a short meeting?
It might be.
Yeah, you see.
Do I hear a motion to accept the draft schedule for this coming year?
I'll do that.
Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The next item we had was I guess Jeff was here, or you wanna bring us up to date on the school situation and
Sure,
what you see coming up in the coming year?
Sure. I've prepared something for you guys. What do you want me to situate myself?
Well,
Here, take mine and I can move.
So, what I've historically done is just kind of taking us through where we are last year, where we are this year, and what we foresee in the following year. So, I'll kind of hand these around. There should be 3 copies. Let me just make sure that
Three copies or
there's 3 years. So current, previous year, current year, and next year. And
Then we pass one for here.
So, I'd like to start just with this past year. Oh, sorry. Yep. How many more do you guys have? Yeah. I'd like to start with the past year that you're just in. And just to let people know, in case they don't know, every year, you all set? Doesn't go?
We're coming.
I'm missing the problem. I
You
have
just missed
18,
the
19,
clock?
and 19.
Yeah, so there's academic year 18-19, academic year
You just did
19-20,
2021?
and 20-21. Yes.
2021, oh, just, no. Oh,
Here's a 2021.
Good lord,
Does everybody have everything?
I should have stapled these.
Yes.
Had I known.
Clearly.
Had I
Say
known,
next
my
time, Jeff.
goodness.
Just send them to me and
Yeah,
I'll have them all.
that's perfect. Noted.
Happy to.
All right, so,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So just in the way of review, so last year, we had a student count K through 8 of 192. We had a high school count and distribution of 101.8 high school students distributed as shown. OOD is out of district. As you know, the town budget passed a budget of $7,057,145. That was a 1.7% operating increase. Then we also had repairs to the roof, which was 0.25, and the kindergarten, the public warrant for kindergarten, which was 0.83. At that point, the increase was offset by $144,000 from surplus, largely from unanticipated revenues and savings. The overall tax increase for 2008 due to the efforts of the select board and the school combined with the surplus, that was $0 to the tax rate, or the increase of 0 to the tax rate. So based upon the audited financial numbers in 2018-19, we have a surplus this year of $171,503, which is going to be returned to reduce taxes. This was largely a result of a reduction in student costs in special ed K-8 and a reduction of high school residential special education tuitions. And then also a decreased cost of employing for one-year positions, which were a result of unanticipated faculty vacancies, which we couldn't fill long-term, we filled with short-term personnel, which are significantly less. In terms of this past year, our high school numbers enrollment dropped to what we had budgeted, despite our intent to draw money from the high school trust. This was in part due to parents sending their children to boarding schools or independent schools, and therefore not the responsibility of the town. Due to the notice of the town and the highway department could not logistically perform snow removal. As you know, we purchased a snowplow that came out of the maintenance trust and the small rural schools grant, and it was determined that that was the most financially solid decision long-term given the yearly bids we got for snow removal. The short-term staffing solutions due to these unexpected vacancies resulted in savings to lines of personnel. We now have filled those positions with long-term personnel, so we don't anticipate that fluctuation moving forward. This summer we also completed retrofitting the first floor elementary classrooms and the hall lights with LED lights, which we anticipate will reduce the cost of electricity and maintenance. For the third year, we received energy credits due to our consumption of wood pellets. This credit was $6,735, and that line goes to offset it's settled as a carbon, so there's a carbon,
You sell it on some market.
yeah, it's a carbon market, and so people buy the energy credits, and then based upon that,
And you get money.
and we get money.
It's not like a grant or
No,
something.
nope, it's an open market.
Question before you go on.
Sure, please.
Normally on the budget, we have warrant articles, any surplus first goes into certain of the trust funds.
Yep.
And you indicated that you had 171,000. Is that after putting the money into the trust fund? So
Yeah.
we fully funded those two trust fund articles?
We had three.
Three.
On the last page, you'll notice that we put $10,000 into the maintenance trust. We put 25 into the high school trust, and we put 10 into the post-retirement trust. So that is 171 is after we've satisfied those trusts.
That's good.
It is good. If it's okay, I'd like to.
Sorry, one more,
Please.
I think you clarified it here in the notes, but just to make sure it also includes no drawdown from the high school reserve?
Yeah, yes, that is correct. Just, it also meant that we did not draw anything from the high school trust because our high school numbers fell to what we budgeted, as opposed to what we thought we would have, or the students we did have, when we started this process this time of year.
But now we were even budgeted or anticipated.
$105,000.
Right. Thank you.
What was the net cost of the tractor?
So like, when you say net,
After the grant.
oh, it was paid for, everything for it was paid out, nothing came from operations. It was trust,
Yeah, so what did you draw from the maintenance trust?
about $30,000.
Just out of curiosity, why is it less expensive to employ someone for a one-year position than for a full-time?
Right, so, two reasons. In the case specific to last year, it's because we filled the position with somebody who is not certified. And they fulfilled that position, and so they were paid as an aide, which is not permissible more than 1 year. It's called, the Emergency Certification Procedure, CEP or something like that. So, we got permission to do that from the state for 1 year, because the position was, classified as critical need, which meant that it was difficult to hire. And so we hired somebody, paid them as an aide, and, saved us, 12 weeks. Let's see. Saved us $27,002.50. Other questions? So moving to our current year, we just got 2 new students today. So our K-8 enrollment is 98. And I'm gonna come back to this high school count and distribution, but right now we have 89.5. As you know, because one student is going to the island school for the second semester. The town passed a budget of $7,320,373, which was a budget increase. And you remember that was where we had the $180,000 of roof. So when we took that amount out, it was 3.7. If that amount was in, it was 1.12. CPI was 2.7. The increase of $263,220 will be reduced by the surplus of $171,000. This results in a net increase to the budget of $91,725, or 1.3% over the previous year. If we exclude the 180 from the roof, if we included it, it would be negative. It would be a negative increase. So that would be a decrease. I'm always used to talking about things in increases. And that, of course, at 1.3 is half of the CPI for that year. And so this will be a review for many of you, but with the continuing closure of River Road. We met last Monday and had a discussion. We appreciate all of you that came and weighed in. And agreed that from a financial sense, it made most sense to purchase a van instead of going into a lease. We have done that. We negotiated an even better deal than what we had when we brought to you. And we now have, we're now the proud but reluctant owners of a blue van. We are now in the process of policies to ensure that the possession of a van doesn't expand the responsibility we have for transportation. And we're in the process of doing that. As I stated earlier, we've now, all the positions which were temporary or interim positions have been filled, so we don't expect that the fluctuating staff costs will be an ongoing question. In August, we were notified that the state estimate that we're given in November for use in this year's budget will be reduced by $12,663. Hey, the kindergarten aid came in at $18,700. Kind of felt like a shell game to me, with promise of otherwise, but whatever.
It's a net positive 6,000.
It's a net positive, yeah. We would have loved, so we're going, again, in November, we're going to hear what the state suggests, and we'll use that as our budgeting number, but as you know, that they can change that number later on. And really what that does is it increases the town's tax liability because it's a loss of revenue. But it's also something we can't control. So we want to caution that, so this is the second year in a row of a surplus that we've returned to reduce taxes. We just want to make sure that people understand that we do not think that this is something that is ongoing. When we do the budget, we budget actual heads and head count. And with the changes in staffing that we've had, that's also contributed to it. Special ed is always an unknown thing. We can be glad that things really broke our way. I can say that it feels good to be able to return revenues to taxes, but I assure you that it's not because we've asked for more than we anticipated spending. It's just been fortunate that we moved. That being said, this year, over the summer, we had an unusual number of people, families move who had high school students. And so we're down, and this is a record, 11.5 students in high school. So, that's a lot of money. Yeah.
Well over 100.
Yep. So,
It's about 20.
what we don't know, because we haven't received we have not received the invoices from all high schools, is how many total we've gained. But we do know that we have one high school bill, and it shows that decrease.
Do we have a sense of how much the different schools are charging this year compared to last year?
Oh, this year, no. Well, no, we have the tuition numbers from last year for this year. What we don't know is the tuition for next year. So that, I just got done saying, hey, it's unlikely we'll see a surplus, but we might see a surplus again this year, given the number of high school students that have moved. It wasn't a lot of families, but it was a number of the families had multiple kids in the household.
But that can go either.
It can go either way. We had plus 16 2 years ago, and now we're negative 11.5. So, as we go to next year, a couple things to keep in mind is that we have, this is the year that we're negotiating contracts for teachers. And so the budget that will be presented to the community will be,
Does anybody have any further questions
Yes.
on the current year before we go into next year's budget?
and we can also come, because some of these things we're gonna come back to.
Well,
once-
I just,
Yep.
I'd like to finish one before we start the next.
last year, 2018-19, the budget was for $7,057,000, and then that was, which if there was no surplus, we'd have to raise it all from taxes, but there was $144,000 that we.
So we don't have to raise all of that. We have to raise, so what happens is the DRA creates a report that says you get so much in state funding, there's so much in catastrophic aid, and all these other points of what we would call
So
revenue.
we're not looking at the revenue.
Right,
pictures.
and that's the challenge.
Right, so that's confusing, but I guess if I'm trying to compare 1920 with the surplus from 2018-19 with the previous year with the prior year's surplus, I'm trying to figure out like what's the impact to the tax rate.
Right, so, so this will be an answer that I will try to answer, and then Dino will contribute to the conversation as well. So last year, we had the budget, and then we had what the state contributes, and what happened is we got the catastrophic aid from the state, which was about 60,000 something. That was unanticipated. It was based upon the previous year's expense in special ed, so 17-18's expenses, and that was a year we got hit really hard. We had, we had a student move in January that was about $300,000 of expense, totally unanticipated on the budget. What the state determines is there's an algorithm that they use to determine whether or not how much of that is reimbursed through what's called catastrophic aid. And it's I'm hesitant to quote it because that thing's running. But it works something like 80% of 10 times the per pupil cost is refunded at 70%, something like that. So it's, you're kind of sitting there like,
They're trying to confuse you. So
exactly. And that amount can fluctuate because what I understand is that the state basically gets a block grant, and then it takes all the students that qualify for the CAT aid, and then in all the districts, and says, okay, we have this much to distribute over all of these. And so this year you're going to get 70%. This year you're going to get 60%. This year you're going to get 80%. And then we find out, and we're like, okay, that's what it is. And then we continue to have unanticipated revenues from students that are tuitioning into the district, and costs that, again, high school students in some cases, or special ed costs, which go down. And so that's what led to the 144. Our plan this past year, 1920, was we wanted to return a portion of that 144, basically dissect 144 so that we could step out of that, because essentially what surpluses are, it's like, hey, we just got 144,000 towards our tax liability. Next year, if there's no surplus, we don't have that. So what I'm always trying to do is trying to figure out, okay, so how can we can step out of that, it's not proper to call it revenue, but I don't really know what other term it is. Can I call it revenue?
it's revenue.
Okay. Step out of that revenue so that there isn't a big hit on the tax liability for the town. So, in 1920, we were trying to be really conservative with how we were expending money, and that's why we're doing the things we did to save money, because we're like, okay, we'd like to bisect 144, we'd like to return about $90,000 to begin to step out of it. We did a really good job, except we increased the amount that we reduced, and that's largely, again, because of special ed costs, which we can't really track day to day because of, because students, services may increase or decrease, people may move in or move out. And so it wasn't until towards the end of the year that we realized we were going to overshoot our mark, and return more than we had for the year before. So it's a challenge. People have said, Jeff, you shouldn't try to manage both ends of the candle, because it's really hard to project both, what is going to come in revenue, and I can control expenditures, but the revenue side, I won't know. But I still really want to try the best we can, so that there isn't that year where all of a sudden there isn't a surplus and we have to step out of that in 1 year. So it's still going to be my intent going forward that now with 177,000, I'd like to bisect that amount next year. So I'd like to have some to return, so that we don't feel the loss of 171,000 in 1 year. Now, it looks like next year, if high school numbers stay that way, that'll be possible, which is good news. And I'm still kind of trying to figure out how I can project forward to know, how much I try to hold back on spending, or, things like that, and actually, contribute to a greater surplus. But we can't,
I don't understand why we're even thinking in these terms. If there's a surplus in my brain, that is money. One, these budgets are expense-based or cost-based
Yep.
budgets.
Mhm.
So you're not, this isn't a revenue source, it's a reduced expense from what you thought it was going to be. That's why there's a surplus.
Right.
It's reduced expense.
Well, no,
no.
it's actually because, in this case, it's both revenue side and expense.
And
The
the
60,000.
Because we got.
Because of the 60, but this year, the 171 is because of reduced costs.
And again, revenues, because we have,
Reduction of student costs,
Right.
decreased costs of employing one-year positions.
right, and then also we have revenue from tuitions, from students who have tuitioned into the,
Okay, but those, for the most part, those are gonna be not significant, not material compared to the reduction in costs. But, when we look at these budgets, in my brain, you should be looking from a cost up.
yep, we do. We do a zero sum.
Zero budget
Yep.
up, this is what it is. So
Yep.
if there's a surplus of, $171,000, that's effectively money that should go back to the taxpayers in the
Agreed.
following year. So, the concept of saying, let's, to use your language, bisect it or split it in half, and the only way you can do that in my brain is if you're gonna inflate some expense to say, okay, we're gonna have,
No.
I don't know how else you do it in the budget.
Right, well, what we try to do is we try to raise money and offset costs that we have in the budget through grant work and things like that, things we can't
I'm just
anticipate.
talking about the surplus, I'm talking about the 171, so.
Right. So, and this is why, people suggested, don't even bother trying, but the reason I want to try to do that is because, so every time we build a budget, we build it with a zero sum. So we're looking at how many kids we have in the school. And we say, okay, these are the kids. So special ed, it's, the services are based upon individual kids. Like, we have this much in because this student requires it as part of their IEP. We have this in our high school trust because these are the kids we have. Actually, we can put our fingers on their heads and say this is where they're going. And then things, and again, it's not a bad thing that it's broken our way in some significant ways. That's good. That money's getting returned to reduce taxes. That's a really good thing. And the only thing that I want to just be careful of is the following year. So after we've had a period of surplus, the following year would be the increase to whatever the budget was, or decrease or whatever, plus having to make up the difference of that lost revenue.
Well, we attempt to manage those changes that we can't predict through these reserve funds. The high school reserve fund, which we didn't draw down last year.
Right.
That's how we manage those, not through,
And that's why I wanna get into next year. That's where I'm going in with next year.
my only point is, I mean, let's think of it from an expense side up. What
That's
does
fine.
it cost to run the school?
Yep.
I'm just not worried about surpluses.
Okay, I would like to not create, whiplash in terms of lost revenues, on people. And so the best scenario is what we budget is what we expect. That's the best scenario. And because of these fluctuations, what we budgeted for, and then what has happened in the, basically 10 months from when we're actually building these numbers is a lot of things change. And in the last, this past couple of years, it's meant that students have moved away. And that's not a predictable trend. It is the way it has fallen over this period of time. And so all I'm saying is I am cognizant. So as a budget committee who has always said, we want to be looking forward and we want to be understanding everything that is downstream. One of the things that I'm watching downstream is that period of time in which after there has been a period of surpluses, there's a loss of surplus, and in that year, the tax liability will have to carry the loss of the revenue plus whatever increases there is in the tax in the school. And I just want, I am conscious of that. And I want to try to mitigate that as best I can, however I can, as creatively as I can. I don't have a lot to do it, but I'm gonna try.
Isn't that what you tried to do through the high school reserve
Yep.
fund last year?
And so that brings us to kind of this year and the strategy we're gonna try to employ here.
I'd just like to say one thing that's different that may confuse people even more. The school budget can't carry a surplus. The town budget has what they call the undesignated fund balance, which is built up through surpluses. And then when it comes time to set the tax rate, the selectmen at that point can vote how much of that they'll use to reduce taxes.
Which is what they did last year to make it zero.
But the school can't do that.
So technically, what happens to that surplus?
If the school doesn't do anything active with the surplus, it automatically is used to reduce the amount that they raised by taxes the following year.
Following year.
So,
And then it's a lot more volatile.
You have to do it, you have to use it the very next year. You can't bank it and use it over several years.
Which is what?
The
And so-
town can't.
Right. And so that's how you can smooth out. So like if there was a big surplus, you could release it over 3 years as opposed to all at once. The town can. We don't have that
It gets to
mechanism.
more, but, we don't need to belabor it, but it gets to my heart of my question, like, why even talk about this with the school budget when it's not even a function?
Well, because I'm committed to trying to
Smooth it out.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's why we have reserves for high school and special ed.
And so that's so let's, unless there's other questions, I'll kind of get into the current year.
We're ready to go on to the 2021, which will be the upcoming budget that goes to the March meeting.
So, based upon, the loss of those several families with a good number of kids, we've adjusted our high school count to 99. That's what we expect right now. That's the number of students that we have that are in high school and that will be going to high school from our current 8th grade. We're going to be revising that number and looking at, again, are some of those kids going to potentially private schools? How many are at Crossroads? Things like that. Over the last several years, we've been really trying to use and to spend down the high school trust. And it just so happens in the same 2 years that we've been trying to do that, there's been a lot of volatility in high school numbers. which meant that we haven't actually had to draw, or couldn't draw, from the trust because the amount that we actually budgeted, which was a suppressed number from what the head count that we could do, resulted in. That's not always going to be the case, but it has been the case in the last 2 years. So this year, what we're going to be doing, given the fact that now we have 2 years where we do that, and we have 2 years which we planned withdrawals, and we haven't had to, and we have a high school trust that is, essentially $600,000. We're going to be using that much more, or what I'm recommending is coming up with scenarios in which we use that trust much more aggressively, and we suppress the number of students that we are paying for out of the money that we raise from taxes considerably. But again, we want to be careful with that, because if we suppress it in 1 year, the next several years we have to walk out of that suppression so we don't feel that whiplash. And so we're going to be working, in fact, my plan is to give Rusty a call in the next couple days, so we can sit down and be like, all right, let's just derive a couple different scenarios in which we say, okay, what if we budgeted this much, or this much, or this much to draw from the trust, looking what that does to the fund balance to make sure that, we don't want to spend the resource all in, a couple of years. We want to make sure that this trust is here for not only this year, but for, for years to come. So what we want to be able to do is draw as much as we can to, bring that trust amount down, but also ensure that we get to a number where we're actually drawing from the trust. And so I think that means in the last several years, last 2 years, we anticipated pulling $105,000 last year, which we didn't need to. Then this year, I think it was $50,000 that we anticipated to draw down, and of course, we're not going to need to, unless we get a lot more students back. And so, I think what I look forward to do is bringing back that conversation to the budget committee and say, all right, let's look at these things together, and where is the relative risk that we want to take in terms of, do we think our numbers are going to go up? Do we think they're going to go down? Do we want to commit this much of that resource, the resource of the trust, or do we want to be more conservative or less conservative in terms of how much we draw down in 1 year? I have a means by which we can project that, but really I think it's one of those decisions about risk tolerance and sustainability of the trust. So, I think that that's a conversation that is going to be very constructive for the budget committee to participate in. I look forward to your suggestions, and I think it's the perfect role for a budget committee to look at these things long-term and strategically, and that's really what we're talking about doing. And so one of the ways that we bisect those surpluses is by use of the trusts.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Isn't there some sort of formula based on your school budget, how much you should contain in the trust fund?
So no, there isn't any formal guidance on that. But I think for us, so we have, we categorize them in 2 different forms: reserve trusts, which are really, these are in case of catastrophe type of things, and then actively managed trusts. So the 2 that are actively managed are the post-retirement, which we anticipate spending down. So that's based upon commitments that we have for retirees, so that we're not adding that to the budget to pay for. And then high school trusts, which historically had been kind of in case we got 20 new students. But what happened is we never did. So that's where I came in and I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. We're holding on to this money in case of this thing, which actually has never happened. So what I believe to be the best way to maintain that trust is to spend it down. And you know, like the special education trust, should be somewhere around $250,000 to $300,000, because that's what that is 1 year tuition for the New Hampshire School for the Blind. So if we had a student that moved here, that was visually impaired, $300,000. And that type of thing has happened in the recent history.
Can I-
From
But the
state,
following
you don't
year.
know when or how much.
Exactly, we don't know how much, and it's the following year.
Right, but also with special education,
Education.
you are allowed to.
Exceed your budget.
So it's, so the school board feels, or I guess has decided that 250,000, 300,000 is their comfort level for that trust. Historically, it's been 100 to 200,000 is the balance. I think that's something that the budget committee may want to weigh in on, is what is the right target number? Because even if they did get a single student who moved into the district, it costs $1,000 for the year, they can run a deficit for the year.
But what that means is it's a little bit harder than that.
Raise
Yeah,
that
but
money.
that's,
Right, it's the one place, and the state says there's only one place that you can spend more than you've collected, and that's in special ed, for that reason.
It's a question of, or if you said you want it sitting in a savings account, or do you want to ask the taxpayers for the next year, right, would it end up being kind of double hits?
That's right. And so, you know, it's been around 250 for quite some time, and with, so anyway, so I think that's where that number comes. The enrollment trust, 96, is about what it would be costing for benefits, social security, taxes, all the payroll taxes and stuff like that for a teacher. So what that has meant is that, you know, if we get to the point where we're like, yeah, you know what, there's one of these students, we may need a teacher, we may not, we can say, all right, we won't, because if we need to last minute, we have the money in the trust to pay for that. And so what it has meant over the last several years is, where we've had a number of classes at the tipping point, we haven't put a teacher in there to deal with that possibility of there needing to be a split. So that's kind of reserved. But high school, you know, I think maintaining, you know, a threshold where we can continue to have, you know, somewhere between 100, maybe 150 in there, and, you know, have a way that we can keep that amount and sustain it, would be, in my mind, a more reasonable amount of money. Knowing that $100,000 is, what, how many kids? It's 4 kids. So, you know, depending upon whether we want to have somewhere in there in case of, or we want to use it like we are right now, where we're actively managing it to offset surpluses, you know, that's kind of the conversation moving forward. But certainly wanting to spend it down from its present level and using it to offset these, you know, good news. You know, boy, a lot of towns would love to hear that their special ed costs went down and kids from high school moved out of town. But, you know, what we can't do is we can't say, oh, well then, let's reduce the budget by $171,000, because, you know, where we build it from is, we have this many kids. We know the cost of the schools, we know which schools, we have a rough idea of which schools they're going to, and so we know we can expect this. And then if they move, well, or if somebody moved in.
Question about
Sure.
the special education trust, kind of going back to, in 1718, you said, and I wasn't on board then, but you said you had a catastrophic, like somebody moved to town.
Yep.
They required a significant amount of money.
Yep.
But did you draw down from like $500,000
Yeah.
in that?
Nope.
How
So-
much did you have in that
Yeah,
trust
so-
in that year?
So what we did in that year was we had a offsetting savings of almost the exact amount in high school. So we underspent high school and we really overspent in special ed. And so we didn't have to draw from the trust. And, well, that, I don't know, I just felt like somebody said, unfortunate, that's great, I wish I could say it was skill, but,
Because if you had a couple of special ed out of district people come in, 600,000, and you had a family with 2 high school kids that went to wherever they went for 25 each, it's 50,000, you'd be kind of in hot water.
Yeah, but I mean, realistically speaking, how often have we had a $200,000 or $300,000 expense for one student
It's
in
not
a year?
unusual.
It's not
Right, so
unusual.
that's
We
my
had 3 of
question.
them one year.
A lot more you can,
yeah, we're actually now, so we went through a period where there was, when I first got here, it was like 0, 0, 0, 0, and then it was 1, then 2, then 3, then 5. At one point, we got as high as 6, and now we're getting down to 0 again. So that feels good, but I had no idea what happened when it got up to the, you know.
I do, because I was sitting here.
Yeah.
So
But-
does Judy.
Yeah, we all were sitting here, but, you know, what happened that it just happened that, you know, all of those people just happened to be living in the community. We almost had, there was a family, you know, who last spring, came to my office and said, we're moving to this town, this is the house that we're putting on the market, and our child is blind. Noted in my head, and I said, okay, don't worry, that's why we have the trust. We had them on the books, come September 1st, still not there. And so we're like, okay, it must not have bought the house. All right. And, you know, I'm sure they would have been wonderful members of the community, but we didn't have to bear that expense. And I can't say it, you know, I don't want to be like, hey, somebody didn't move to our community, but we didn't have the expense.
Right. That 298 and change would be gone.
Well, but again, if it happened this year, what would have happened? We
Right.
would have eaten up our high school.
The 177, yeah.
So, man, I feel lucky. I'm
Yeah,
gonna play the
well-
lottery. But we can't always, you know, we can't bank on the fact that both, you know, expenses are gonna be just, you know, serendipitously offset by unexpected decreases in things. But just to reassure you, as Eric, you were saying, we build things based upon counting heads. And when we bring the budget of personnel, it's by counting heads. When we bring the cost for benefits, it's because we've been told, you know, by the insurance company in December, this is what your rate increase is gonna be. And we base it on our revenue side, based upon in November what we hear from the state, and they said, this is what you should expect, this is what you should be using in your budget for what the state aid is. And then what happens? It can be different, as we found out in August. So,
On that note, why is it different? Like, do they have an explanation for that? Is this adequacy aid?
yes,
And we're
that's
getting,
adequacy.
so then we either had less, I guess in my mind, that means we didn't have the estimated special education costs, so they reduced something, or we lost kids, so they subtracted 3,600 times.
Or they've changed their formula.
Yeah, their formula can shift. You can't put it on 1%.
Jeff, could you break down that expense, special ed per student? I'm having a real hard time wrapping my arms around that one.
Okay, so, which part are you talking,
These are out.
These are out of place, out of.
is that 300 you're talking about?
Yeah,
So,
which apparently is not that